Welcome to part two of my interview with Brian Thomas, founder of the law firm Thomas Law, based in downtown Chicago, and writer of the blog You're Doubting Thomas. The main topic of our conversation has been race, with a focus on Brian's blog posts. If you say I'm not racist, I have an African American friend, read this. And to some, I'm still just an N-word in a stolen car. In this episode, I recount two instances where I was pulled over by the police and how that experience would have likely been different for a Black male. I'm going to recall two instances where I was pulled over. I've been pulled over more than twice, but they both occurred when I was in my early 20s. And one was I was a senior in college, and it was night, and I was driving to my off-campus apartment, and I got pulled over. I turned a little late on a red light. I made a left turn, and the officer pulled me over, and I just got out of the car and was chatting with him, and I had my hands in my pockets the whole time. I wasn't even aware of it. And I got a warning. And the last thing he said to me, and it was just in passing, he said, oh, next time you get pulled over, make sure you take your hands out of your pockets. And I thought, okay. And then the other instance was, it was a few months later, and I was visiting, and this is in Miami, by the way, where I grew up and went to college, and I was visiting a friend on South Beach, and we went to a jazz club and had some drinks. I was buzzed, and I was staying with my grandparents who were living in Bal Harbor at the time, so about a 20-minute drive. And when I was driving to their building, I was on Alton Road, which is probably one of the top 10 most expensive neighborhoods or homes on that road in the country. And I got pulled over, and I was a little nervous, and the officer had me step out of the car, ran a sobriety test, a couple of them. I walked the line. He had me say the alphabet. And then while he's doing this, another officer came. And so I was starting to get really scared. And I thought there was a very real chance that I'd be booked. But I'm also thinking, while this is happening, I'm just going to call my dad, because he was a pretty well-known attorney in the area, which really spoke to my privilege, right? And what ended up happening was the officer, he said, if I give you a breathalyzer right now, that means I'm going to have to take you in. He said, but I'm not. What I want you to do, I want you to get back in your car, and about a half mile down, there's a park, and I knew what park he was talking about. He said, I just want you to pull over there, and I want you to wait an hour. I said, okay. And I'm shaking, and I get in my car, I drive, and I see the park, but I don't see any parking spaces. And so I'm thinking, well, am I going to get in trouble? Well, first of all, I thought, okay, well, maybe he's talking about another park, because I don't want to then get in trouble for just parking illegally. Mm-hmm. So I kept going, looking for this park, and the same officer pulled me over again. And he got out of the car and came up to my window, and he was yelling at me. He's like, are you fucking with me? What the fuck are you trying to do here? I'm gonna haul your ass in. And I said, officer, I'm hands aren't on the wheel. And I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I didn't see any spots there, and I didn't want to get in more trouble. And he goes, fine. He said, there's another park right down the street. Pull in there. I don't give a shit if there are any spaces, and you just wait out there. And if you don't, then you're gonna be in big trouble. Fine, okay. And so I do that, and I just sat there till the break of dawn. This is like 3-4 hours later, and then I went home. How would that experience, do you think, have been different had it been you or any Black male? Both those experiences.
Yeah. Well, again, the real answer is I don't know. I suspect that I would have probably been brought in, right? But you never know what that officer's motivations were on that night, right? I can tell you that I was trained, like going back to your first example about you being, kind of getting out of the car, putting your hands in your pockets. I mean, that really spoke to me because I was trained differently by my parents, right? You get pulled over, especially when it's night, you put that dome light on, you open your window, hands on the wheel, on top of the wheel so they can be seen at all times. And yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And you comply. You never resist, right? And then, if there's a problem, you deal with it in the morning, right? My obligation is to get out of that situation. And if that means going downtown, fine, right? Or going to the police station, I'm fine with it. And then, let the lawyers deal with it later. So I'm fortunate, right? Because, I was in a position then to know that, we'll let the lawyers deal with it later, right? But my problem is, or a problem that I have is that when you get pulled over, everyone's nervous, as you kind of alluded to. Shoot, you could be driving down the highway, and I kind of have a lead foot. I'm guilty of that. And you see the lights on behind you, and then immediately, your heart's in your throat, and you're like, oh, they got me.
Right, but I'll tell you, in that situation, yes, I feel that initial pang of fear.
Yeah.
But then what I'm worried about, and the only thing I'm worried about is I'm going to have to pay for a ticket. That's the only thing I worry about.
Well, I think a lot of this is really kind of, some of this is in my control, right? And there are obviously examples. Philando Castile comes to mind where he did everything right and he still got shot and killed by a police officer. I don't know what he should have done differently other than not being black.
Right.
But that, and I'm not saying that what happened there wasn't, again, he didn't do anything wrong, but I think there is, a lot in my control so that the situation can go as well as it can be. And that the worst thing I get is a ticket, right? I mean, most of my confrontations, that's a bad word. Most of the times I've had to deal with police officers have been very pleasant. The last time I was pulled over was a while ago in Iowa, going to Omaha, where my wife is from, with the family. And, I had a very pleasant conversation with the trooper. I still got the ticket, but it was a decent exchange. I shook his hand afterwards because I just wanted to show respect for a former Marine who was in uniform still. But yeah, I mean, that's the way I was taught, where I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be on the news for the wrong reasons. So because of that, and because there's a little bit of fear approaching me. And I think that that's true with any police officer when they approach a vehicle and they don't know what's going on in there. So let's not, just say all police officers are racist, because I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, unfortunately, we grew up in an America where we've all been conditioned to believe that black men are more dangerous than white males. And because of that, when a police officer approaches a vehicle, they're already on alert. And it doesn't matter who's behind the wheel, because they don't know what's going to happen in that situation. And then that alert gets heightened when it's someone that looks like me. So what I've been taught is, because of that, and because I know that going into the situation, to diffuse it, right? And that's ultimately on me. And I think that's really kind of being a child of the 80s, right? I mean, I know, back in the 80s, I had to act a certain way to kind of diffuse any tension about there being a black or African-American male in the room, right? I needed to make people around me feel more comfortable with my presence there in the classroom or in the gym or wherever I was at the time. And, again, I don't think that was really because everyone demanded it of me, but when there's an African American male, especially in 1984, in a particular space, in a white space, there's a little bit of anxiety that is directed at me because of that. So it was my job to kind of diffuse that anxiety. And that's just the way I was raised, unfortunately. And, being a child of the 80s. And now I do that when I deal with police officers. And I do that basically, I don't want to say daily, but there's that conditioning in me, right? Because that's the way I was raised, and that's because of where I was raised, that wants to make people feel comfortable with me being in the room, when, to be quite honest, that's not my job, right? And that's something that I now know that I shouldn't have to make people feel comfortable with me being at Mariano's.
Yeah.
Yet, being a child of the 80s, that's the way I was raised.
Right. Well, we're the same age around, and I mean, I'm a child of the 80s too. And I could tell you, my parents never had to talk to me about what to do if I get pulled over, not because they were being neglectful. It just wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
Um,
But then and again, I don't want to use confrontation, but then the incident can really go with everything I was told. If the police officer then, when you open the window, the first thing that they say to you, and you're a 45-year-old man who's worked his tail off to, get to a certain place in life, and the first thing they say is, whose car is this? Right? The likelihood that situation is then going to go off the rails is increased significantly, because they immediately come at you, or in that situation the first words are disrespectful, because you're an African American male in a nice car. Obviously you didn't earn this. Hopefully you just borrowed it from someone, because otherwise, because once I run the plate and I find out it's not you, if it's not borrowed, then I'm going to take you in. Right. And so that's why, and usually, and trust me, I'm not saying that that's the question I'm always asked. But that's when a situation that could have been easy can easily go off the rails.
right. And if people weren't prepared like you were by your parents what to do in a situation like that, then yes, it's going off the rails is exponentially greater.
True, but I would say probably more black men than just me were trained the way I was trained. I think that's probably that the majority of us were trained the way I was trained in terms of dealing with police. But then you got the issue of, okay, are you mindful in your approach in this particular situation, or are you going to react because you were kind of disrespected, right, by saying, whose car is this? Or, and then when you go into reaction mode, things can really go south quickly.
And I should mention that when I was pulled over that time, or twice within the same, within 10 minutes, yeah, I should have been. And I should have been arrested because I was probably above the legal limit, and I was very lucky. And I think that the color of my skin had a lot to do with that. Next time on Another Day in Pandemic Paradise, part 3 of 3 of my interview with Brian, is the question, what can I do to help from a white person unfair? Does it place yet another burden on African Americans to help create a solution for a problem that was foisted upon them by us? And how does Brian gauge his level of hope?
I think what we ultimately can do is what we're doing today, and that's having the conversation, right? I think in the last month, really, there's been more of an acknowledgement that systemic racism exists than ever in my lifetime.
In the meantime, be smart, be safe, and wear your mask.